Hi, thank you for joining us. My name is Olaf Opedal. I'm with Information Security at Microsoft IT. I'm currently a Principal Solutions Manager.
Hello, I'm Nir Ben-Zvi. I'm a Principal Program Manager in the Windows Server organization, and we're really thrilled to have you here today with us. We're going to walk today through a real business story that Olaf and I have been working on for the past few years and show you how we can achieve regulatory and business compliance with Microsoft technologies and specifically Microsoft Windows Server technologies.
Well, thank you, Nir. We want to talk about global payroll today. It was one of the business cases we identified where we really didn't have a solution. We knew you had built some tools within Windows that enabled us to achieve compliance. And our core problem was global payroll, as the name indicates, is a global payroll solution for our employees at Microsoft. And we needed to ensure the proper protection of the information as well as being able to adhere to our corporate as well as regulatory compliance requirements.
Yeah, and this is where the development of Windows 2008 R2 really came in, where we worked with Olaf and his peers on developing a set of requirements for what we call the file classification infrastructure that allowed us to classify the data, apply tagging to the data on our global payroll information, and then based on that, protect it and report on it appropriately. For example, some of this data needed to be encrypted with rights management, and we were able to do that with a combination of classifying the data and applying protection with Windows Server 2008 R2 file classification infrastructure.
And what RMS gave us, Rights Management Services, was we were able to provide appropriate protection. So if you have protection on a file server without RMS, the admin can still have access to the information, but with this type of encryption technology, we are able to provide appropriate protection for that kind of information, something that wasn't achievable before.
Yeah, and once we deployed that project in Microsoft IT, it immediately became obvious that we need to be able to manage not only one server, but multiple servers. And that's where we worked with the Solution Accelerator team to develop the data classification toolkit that allows you to kickstart your compliance efforts, as well as then control the configuration for compliance with classification across multiple file servers, and be able to report on it, on what's in compliance, what's not in compliance, and report on what's going on your file servers in regards to classification and rights management protection.
And we truly appreciated the data classification toolkit. The data classification toolkit enabled us to move away from having individual scripts, managing multiple servers with the same script, making sure that all the servers were set up the same way. But beyond that, because it was based on the Unified Classification Framework, the Unified Controls Framework, we were not only able to tag these files based on business control objectives, but also map it back to regulatory requirements without having to go through an entire exercise of mapping. So the data classification toolkit enabled us to manage multiple servers and ensure that the state stayed the same across all these servers. So for us, the DCT was a great breakthrough.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was very successful with a lot of customers as well. Then when we came towards developing Windows 8, we kind of wanted to tackle the next set of challenges with how do we protect content based on who the user is and what the content is. And this is where we came up with dynamic access control in Windows 8, where again with Olaf's team and other teams in Microsoft IT, we were able to take the requirements of how do we actually protect information based on the context of the information, so that it's protected and it's compliant with who can access what information. And for example, with global payroll, and again, we needed to be able to control access to the data based on which country the user is from, so that only people from only people that manage the global payroll from one country will be able to access that global payroll information for that country. And people also move positions in Microsoft. Some people move from one country to another. We needed to be able to have a robust mechanism that allows to control all this. And this is where dynamic access control came into play, where we were able to match the user's context with the actual file context, so that only users from a certain country can access information about that country. This really helped us reduce from tens of thousands of access control lists that were not easy to manage to around 10 access control lists that we were able to then apply to the global payroll information, so that we can now prove our compliance and, of course, be able to continue and manage it in a scalable way.
And for us, the true value of dynamic access control is manifold, actually. One, it's much easier to translate policy into actual control objectives. Instead of having to evaluate tens of thousands of access control lists, we now have a policy language we can apply. Second of all, it gives us the opportunity to embrace consumerization, because there are certain types of information that should not be available and usable on consumer devices, for example, where IT has less control. There are regulatory requirements that require specific controls around machines that only PCs can provide. Dynamic access control allows us to manage this dynamically without a very, very complex solution. So again, an easy policy language translates directly to us into better regulatory compliance and lower cost.
So let's take a look at the demo of dynamic access control on Windows Server 8. So what I want to show you today is dynamic access control in Windows 8. One of the main features that we introduced in Windows 8 with dynamic access control is the ability to centrally control access to data based on who the user is and what the information is. As you can see in this slide, now we can now define in Active Directory how we want to tag our data. We can define both security groups and claims about the user, and we can also define access policies that will then be used on the file server to allow us to control what users can access what information. We call these access policies central access policies that the organization can use as a safety net for accessing data within the organization. On the file servers, we can apply these central access policies, and once we identify the information, then the end user access is governed by the central access policies as well as by the local policy on the file server. So we're going to start our tour on the domain controller, where we have the Active Directory Administration Center that allows us to configure central access policies in the organization. We have two central access rules here that govern access to departmental files and high-impact files. If I open the department access rule, you can see several interesting things here. One is, it tells us which information it governs. So if you look at this condition, it says, we're only interested in files or resources in this case, where resource.department exists. So if the file was not tagged by a department, then this rule is not going to apply to it. And the condition of who can access these files is actually that users can access these files if the user department is any of the resource department. So if user is in the same department as the file, then the user is going to be able to access the data. If not, he's not going to be able to do that. Another rule that we have here is how we access high-impact information. If I open up that rule, you can see that this rule is about resources or files where impact equals high. And for these resources, we only allow the built-in administrators, the system or the owner of the file to access these files. So we have these two safety net rules that are defined by the organization. And now let's go to the file server and see how this works on the file server. So on the file servers, we have these shares that are serviced by the file server. And let's go ahead and apply the central access policies on the department shares. So I'm right-clicking here, Properties, Security, Advanced. And here we have a new tab for applying central policies. So I can go to that tab and I can choose to apply to this share the central access policies that were defined in Active Directory. So both the impact access rule and the department file access rules are now defined here and applied. Now the owner of the data, such as the owner of the finance department, for example, can go into the shares and can go into the finance share and tag it as being from finance. So again, I'm right-clicking, Properties, and now I choose the Classification tab, which is a new tab, and I can see here two tags that were defined in Active Directory, the department and impact tags, and I can choose department to be equal finance, so that now all the files under this finance folder will be marked as finance, and new files that get created there would also be marked as finance. So we tag the information and we have central access policies that govern the access to this information. Now let's go to the client and see how this looks like from the client perspective. So on the client, I'm logged in as Tim. He is a vendor. And let's take a look at what Tim claims are. So I can run who am I and ask for the claims information. And I can see that Tim is from the operations department. So basically Tim can access operations files. If I go ahead as Tim to the department's share that we just seen, when Tim goes into operation to do his work, he can just go ahead and access it and do whatever he needs to do. But if Tim is suddenly interested in looking at financial information and he double clicks on finance, he will of course get access denied because the central access policy denies him access since he is not from the same department as the resource. Now, as you can see, we also improved our access denied experience so that now Tim can get a more contextual message from the file server and also request access if he needs access to that resource. And that would send an email to the right owner of the data. So let's say Tim did that and requested access from the owner of the data, and then the owner of the data went ahead and tried to see why Tim does not have access today. So I'm back on the file server, and I'd like to see why Tim does not have access to that data. I go to the finance department share, and I open up the security properties. I go to advanced, and I have an effective access tab that allows me to see why Tim does not have access to this share. So if I select the user Tim, I can see that Tim does not have access to the data because of the department file access rule. I can conveniently go to the central policy here and take a look at what the department central access rule is, and I can see that it basically says that user department needs to be any of resource department, and that's why I can conclude that Tim is not from the same department as that share. I can go further and say, what if Tim was from the finance department? And I can see that now if Tim is of the finance department, he will actually get access to the files. Now this was pretty obvious from the simple policy that we just saw, but let's say we have 5, 6 different things that we need to do in order to allow Tim access. Beforehand, we needed to do a trial and error, and here we can actually model what would Tim need in order to actually get access to the information. So we saw how we tagged the information, we applied central access policies so that it governs the access of the user to the data, and we can also troubleshoot if there are any issues of access and model what would happen in order to provide the right access to the users. Now let's go ahead, and I want to show you another thing that's related to the same aspects of being able to protect your data based on the tags that are applied to the files. So we've seen how we can apply central access policies, tag the data manually, and then the right access is provisioned automatically. Now let's explore another scenario. Let's say I'm a user that inadvertently copies some sensitive information into a public share. So I have here some customer sensitive data. I'm going to open that, and it has some credit card information. And I'm just going to drag and drop it into some public share. And that of course happens, I would say, more than we want to in some cases. So what happens right now on the file server, this file server is also configured to automatically look for content that is similar to credit card information and tag it as high impact. If I'll go ahead and look at the classification of that file right now, we can see that it was tagged as high impact automatically because it contained credit card information. Now remember, we had that central access rule that said for high impact only the owners or administrators of system can see it. So I wonder what would happen if we go back to the client and see what the client can actually see, what Tim can actually see. So let's go back to Tim. So when Tim goes to the public shares, as you can see, he can only see the files that he has access to. This is because we enabled access based enumeration. So he cannot see the file that is high impact that we just copied to the public shares, because that file was tagged as high impact, and the central access policy said for high impact only owners can see that file. So we've shown you how we can also automatically classify the data so that then the right access policy just kicks in, and even if somebody inadvertently put some data in the wrong location, the automatic classification with the central access policy allows us to protect access to that data from people that are not allowed to see it. Now the last thing I want to show you is how we also protect the data as it leaves the file server. In order to do that, we need to automatically rights manage, encrypt the data when it lands on the file server, so that if somebody takes it and sends it through email, for example, it's still protected by that encryption. So I have here another document that has customer information with credit card, and Tim is going to again copy it into the public shares. What's going to happen right now is similar to what we saw previously. The information is going to be scanned, credit card information is going to be discovered, and the file is going to be tagged as high impact. Then the file server also looks at it and has some rules that say, oh, if it's high impact, then go ahead and RMS encrypt it to the high impact template, so that even if it leaves the file server, it's still protected. So it's protected now on the file server both by the central access policy and the RMS protection, and then when it leaves the file server, it's still encrypted by the RMS protection. So let's go ahead and open that document. As you can see, the document is now protected with the RMS template for high impact documents. So we automatically scanned it, we automatically encrypted it because it was considered high impact, and now we also automatically protect the access to it with the central access policies. So you've seen the end-to-end demo where we are able to define tags on Active Directory. We're able to define user claims central access policies, and then automatically scan information and both protected with central access policies and encrypted if needed, so that even if the information leaves the file server, it's still protected by the rights management policy. So as you've seen, with Windows 8 Dynamic Access Control, you can identify the data through automatic or manual tagging. You can centrally control access to this data. You can also centrally audit access to the data for compliance reporting and forensic analysis. And last, you can automatically RMS encrypt data so that if it leaves the file server, it's still protected by that RMS encryption layer.
Nir, good job on Windows 8.
Thank you so much, Olav. And here are some resources that you can take a look at for both Windows 2008 R2, file classification infrastructure, the data classification toolkit, and the Windows Server 8 Dynamic Access Control.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time.